Hey, hello everyone, welcome to this FA webinar. Today we're going to talk around off-field coaching and more so around how we can be collaborative in that process. So my name's Laura Seth. I'm the FA's Performance Analysis Education Lead. With us today we've got Matthew Joseph, our FA Youth Coach Developer, Bev Priestman, our Senior Women's Assistant Manager, and Andy Muir, who is co-founder of Coach Logic. Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. What we're going to discuss probably over the next 45-50 minutes or so is specifically, I guess, more focusing on our players in the analysis process. So you may have seen a webinar that was released a few weeks ago where we really focused on the coach and the coach's role. Today we're going to move that on and really focus on how we can help our players work with analysis content and ultimately help them be the best that they can be. And the three areas that we're going to focus on is specifically what that might look like for different age groups. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion around that. And then really through some case study examples that the guys on the webinar today are going to share from their worlds, we're going to unpick how we can be more collaborative with players in the process and let them be at the heart of what we do around analysis. So as I started on the previous webinar, these are just questions I'm going to pose to you guys that are watching around this area in general, really. So what I want you to think about is we're clearly in a world now where there's so much resource, there's so much information available to us, even down at lower levels of the game. But really, within your role as a coach, what really is going to help you better objectively evaluate the game and understand the game that might shape your own coaching or might shape the work that you do in terms of practice design? What helps you evaluate your own coaching? And what helps you evaluate the performance of your players, whether that's from an individual basis, a unit basis, or a whole team basis. And then the second one is really around then, how can we help the players? So like I said, there's loads of information out there. How do we as coaches filter that information to help the players understand, digest it, and be at the heart of that process? And I guess just over to you, Bev, in terms of your environment for our senior women's national team. I can only imagine that there's a wealth of insight and information that you as a coaching team have access to. How do you work with that in terms of shaping that and filtering that to deliver some key messages to players?
Yeah, I think the filtering part is really important. I think the modern coach now, needs to be a bit of an expert in learning and maybe how you engage people in that process. Our job, we obviously get a lot of more information than what we deliver to players, and I think we scaffold that across a camp because you have a short, intense period and we haven't seen them for, it could be 3 months, and then you go in all excited and just bombard them. So I think the important part is scaffolding and understanding, learning, and definitely engaging them. I think that's crucial.
And that's great because that tees me up nicely because two parts of that in terms that there is so much information, and as coaches we can often get into a model of just wanting to share and I'll use Bev's terms of bombard potentially players with that information. I guess what we're going to try and unpick through the next 40 minutes or so is how we can maybe flip that on its head and let the players be at the heart of that process, and the players be very much involved in not only working with that information but being the owners and drivers of that content, because ultimately what we're trying to do is help the players be the best that we can be. As coaches, we've all got the same sort of motivation. So around this area, what can we do to give the players the best opportunity to be the best that they can be in their own age group and in their own field, and ultimately, hopefully, in the professional game. And it teases us on nicely to this quote from Gareth Southgate. So really privileged, probably 18 months or so ago now, with Gareth talking quite openly and honestly around the work with the senior men's team. And this was something that really resonated with me. And I think it has real link to connotation to what we do with our players, both on and off the field play. So Gareth here was talking about, the idea of having players that can be very much independent decision makers and thinkers on the field of play, that can work out and see what's going on in front of them, take that responsibility and be able to adjust to the moment within the game as it's going on. And in some respects, as coaches, you almost feel like, making yourselves a little bit redundant, but ultimately the players are the ones that cross that white line. And so it's how can we do some work with the players around analysis, around our off-field world that helps them develop some of those skills that are going to help them when they cross that white line. And again, I'll come back to you, Bev, in terms of, that's a quote from Gareth, but has that got similar sort of connotations? Does that resonate with you from a senior women's perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you only have to look at this photograph to see how many people are in the stadium. I think once they cross that white line at the international level, and you know, in many ways, professional club level, the players can't hear you. So on game day, really, you're there to impact halftime, make subs, and hope that you've done all your hard work during the week with the players. So I think that the future is having a leaderful team, players that can make decisions. And how many times have we prepared a team to play, you know, a certain way or play against a certain way, and that's changed when that whistle goes at kickoff. So I think what we've learned over time and what the players have bought into is they have to be engaged and know the what ifs and work through that as a group of players before the game kicks off.
And I think that then has, you know, if that's the top end of the game, that has real, you know, connection in terms of how we help the players develop their skills and understanding, not only around analysis, but I guess their, you know, their wider skills as a footballer, particularly if we look at the FA's 4-corner model. We've looked there and had a short discussion around the top level of the game. So in order for our players to be successful in the professional environment, whether that's, you know, international football, whether that's in club football at different levels, or even, you know, as a senior player in a grassroots team, what are some of the skills that they might need, you know, on the field of play? What are some of the skills they might need around just working with analysis, information, and analytical insight? And then what does that mean if we work back from there in terms of what we might do in their development phase? So just a few questions to pose, really. I'll come to you, Matthew, on that in terms of your experiences working across a number of clubs in terms of different phases of the game, and when and how we might start getting players to think about being analytical and developing some of their analytical skills.
Yeah, well, I think my experience has sort of led me to think that players really need to think about how they understand how analysis can help them to develop. So it's almost about just giving people the opportunity to start thinking about, what does it mean for me if I start to look at myself? So you have to start to make players feel comfortable looking at their own performance, whatever age they are, whatever level they are. But just get them to think about, well, what do I do when I'm on the pitch? Be happy to look at themselves, looking at the positives and the negatives or the areas for improvement. But I think as long as we can get them to understand how it helps them, and then they can start to recognise what they might need to do, take some ownership, and go back to last night, take responsibility, because this is about putting the players first. And this is a great tool to help players take ownership, and then ultimately take responsibility. So I think, sorry to sort of.
No, you go on, carry on.
I think the first thing really is just getting players comfortable watching themselves. I mean, years and years ago, and hopefully I'm not showing my age too much, it was almost seen as a video nasty. What we need now is players to be comfortable watching themselves, and not just with the things that they've done well, but comfortable with the things that they haven't done so well. But for them to be able to recognise that, rather than us constantly posing a question or pointing out the things that they have or haven't done correctly, in inverted commas.
And no, I think you make a really good point there in terms of one of the areas around analysis that I'm very passionate about, and one of the things I think it's really important for us as coaches to get right is sort of that introduction phase. And I know we're gonna unpick some case studies as we go through the chat that's going to hopefully give people some different ideas of things they might do around that. But I really believe, you know, you won't speak with anyone sort of more passionate about how analysis can help players learn, develop, improve, help them be the best that they can be. And I just think as coaches, we've got a real responsibility to introduce that to players in the right way. Might you refer to, you know, going back in terms of it being a video nasty, and no one wants to be pulled in and you know, have things replayed to them where it's not been great. I know as an individual, when I've played a game or sport, that I know when things have gone right or wrong, and what I want to do is learn, improve, and get better. Now, that doesn't mean you never show anything that's of a negative connotation, but I think we've got a real responsibility to think about how we start working with players in this area, so they have a thirst and a desire to engage with this area of the game to ultimately help themselves improve. I guess, Andy, I'll just come to you on that. Obviously, you know, great experiences through your role with Coach Logic in terms of working with lots of coaching players, and I'd say more so probably in development setting. What's your viewpoint in terms of how we might introduce things to players and help them learn and develop some of those skills?
I think more than anything, it needs to be positive. Like, the experience needs to be positive. So whatever positive looks like, and it'll be very different, I guess, based on the ages. But in terms of what the activity is that they'll actually do, but yeah, I think just whether it's going and making it more fun. So it's going and looking, just go and find some stuff that you think's cool, on YouTube, or go through someone else's game and just who plays in the same position and find some attributes that you'd like to take into your own game or think reflects how you play and what have you. And there's obviously loads of different examples, but I think ultimately it needs to be positive. And going back to your point as well, Laura, about and the video nasty stuff as well, Matthew, is it's not about shying away from when mistakes are made as such, or perceived mistakes. But there is an element of that still. If there is a conversation, there still needs to be a positive outcome from that conversation around whatever it was identified. And I think by starting off using video and being really positive and looking for success and the clues that might leave, it just over time it helps to build trust. So maybe it is just a little bit easier to look at some of those more difficult moments that might have happened in a game and have a positive outcome from that conversation.
And I think that's what it's a two-way conversation, isn't it? So it's not traditionally or historically a lot of those conversations could have been one way, but actually unpicking what people were thinking about at that moment in time and being able to have an open, honest conversation to ultimately help learn from that. Yeah,
I think we're lucky with sort of standing on the shoulders of giants as such, where we see some just amazing examples of what coaches are doing. And actually, just over the last period as well, the most impactful ones have definitely been the situations where they've been more player-led. So the more player-led the task is as such, the more positive an outcome it has after that. And that's, again, going back to Bev, it's not about just here, players, you do it. It's not like kick them a ball on the pitch and say, right, you go and work it out. It is obviously, there is a framework as to what they might be doing, but as much as possible, the next step in terms of that discovery is very player-led, which then allows you to have a conversation because both people are invested in the process.
And I think that leads us on really nicely to what we're going to sort of, unpick over the next period in terms of just bringing some case studies to the table. And with the panel that we've got today, we've just got, a wealth of experience across a range of different areas. So Bev clearly from the female game and then with her experience with our international side, Matthew from, his experience working with a number of coaches in clubs within football, and then Andy, who are jokingly referred to the Scotsman from an oval ball game, bring some insight into some other sports. And there's so much to learn. I hope for people that are watching, you'll be able to sort of listen and hear some examples that we're going to talk through now and hopefully take a few things away that will be applicable to your own individual environment. So I guess, Matthew, do you want to kick us off with some examples from club football?
Yeah, so one of the examples I want to give is a club they've really embraced analysis in recent times and made a real impact with the players in terms of them understanding the meaning to them. So I kind of put this little bit of a slide together, but really it's more about the stuff on the side. So I think like before we spoke about making players become more comfortable viewing and analysing themselves. So just being able to identify their own performance, that in itself is the fundamental skill here which carries on all the way through. Because if we don't empower or allow players to become comfortable viewing themselves, then they'll the purpose of analysis will never be as impactful. So first of all is getting them to look at themselves. Then, as and when we see fit and as the players are capable of doing so, it's just getting them to broaden their lens to not just look at what they do, but see the impacts of their performance, and then start hopefully to get the players noticing other things that are happening in the game. So whether it's units or whether it's the whole game or moments, and then thinking about acquiring strategies to deal with them, and then sort of move on to them, the players feeling more empowered and have an opportunity to contribute. Because the more that the players understand the purpose of what they're doing, the more impact there will be on their learning. And what we're keen on is that this is a real key, and I'm I'm really enthusiastic about it. It's a really good development tool for the players to help to develop themselves, because ultimately it's their learning, but they're going to have to make into a performance where they'll be judged. So it's about them understanding how they learn, understanding and picking apart moments in the game and understanding the game. Because then what that should do at the end is just give them a deeper understanding of how to analyse. So what that will do is help them to teach them to what are the things they're trying to analyse. So is it just my performance? Is it a specific moment in the game? Is it about the game in general? Is it about a block of games? Is it a tournament I've been in? Is it, whatever phase or stage I'm going through? So we can really help the players have a deeper look, a deeper dive into what it is they're doing. And the more that we can give them that ownership and that they can feel comfortable in sharing what they see, the more impactful it will be with them.
And I think you make some really good points there in terms of the players being the heart of the process. I think that really links nicely back to the quote we've just looked at from Gareth in terms of ultimately they're the players that are on the field of play playing the game. Like I say, I'm really passionate. Analysis can play a big part in developing some of the core fundamental skills that are going to help players in that environment. And by having them at the heart of that process, it is critical to helping them, develop some of those insights and those skills that they're going to need on the field of play.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way to keep them connected to the game, because all players or all people have been involved in something where their perception of what happened at the time might look slightly different or wholly different to what they see when they review it again. And this is all about the perceptual stuff. Is if I see something which I've done well or something that needs developing, how did I feel in that moment? Do I know what it feels like when things are going well? And actually, if I start to look at the analysis or look at the clips of those things, I start to recognise, well, I might have performed this action because of what I saw around me, and that allowed me to be successful. Or it might be that I didn't actually recognise or take into consideration all the things around me, so this particular actual performance wasn't successful. But while you're in the moment, it's really hard while you're developing as a player to start to pick all those things out. Obviously, the more experienced players become and the better they get and the more exposure they get to different scenarios, the better they become at making better decisions around all the stuff that's going on. The perceptual skills become really good. The decision making becomes even quicker, and therefore they can make more appropriate decisions. And we're just trying to help them to get to that point.
No, absolutely. Do you want to move on then to I guess more specific case study with the players in the club that we're talking around?
Yeah. So again, if we're linking it back to sort of modern trends, and analysis is becoming more and more important in the modern game, and even with to the point now where we're allowed to have iPads down at the side of the pitch to a point. But this particular example that I'm going to talk to you about is a club who they give their players probably 4 analysis opportunities per week, and 3/4 of those are player-led. So therefore, the players are really, really buying into it. So they've created an environment where the players understand the importance of analysis. And this is taken from a youth team at the moment, this particular incident process here. And they basically play the game on a Saturday. While the game's still fresh in their minds, the game is sent to them on a Sunday. They're already part of predefined units, as it were. So generally goalkeeper, defenders, midfielders and forwards. And that information, the game will be sent to those players on a Sunday. They will then collaboratively get with those people in their units and think about the game, think about what went on, related to the performance and related to score granted and probably related to individual performance. But they're talking to each other about, well, what did you think happened in this? Because my perception of it, what happened was this. They then get to a point where they get something together where they then present that back in their units to the coaches on a Monday afternoon. So after training's gone, they then come back and they've presented some stuff which is still fresh in their mind, but they come and present that back and talk about the things that they thought were good, and they're kind of encouraged to, as a broad framework, think of a couple of 3 things that they thought they did well, a couple of 3 things they thought they could develop. And in that moment, all the coach's job is just to probe and ask questions. It isn't to say, well, that's your opinion and this is mine. It's just to probe and ask some questions. But they'll do that in their units. And then the coaches who have being part of that process, they all come together. And the great thing is those individual meetings are filmed again, because what they do, the club film them, and they've just produced a catalogue of reviews that the players have delivered over a period of time. So not only the players can come back and view them again, but if a player decides, or at another date later in the season, moves from one sort of unit, moves from playing in defence to playing in midfield, they've got a catalogue of stuff that they can go back and review, but also that they can contribute towards going forwards. So I think it's a really good example. What they then get is
coming in there is, for me, one of the things that stands out is the collaborative nature of it in terms of the players working together, and I guess just linking back to the performance on the field. So we're in a world where technology is very much developed. So there are lots of online platforms available where we can go and engage with content. And definitely when they first came out, I recognise there was a big shift to then individually going watch things on your own, and you might be reviewing your own content individually. But ultimately, the game is a team game, and some of the skills of the game are, things like your ability to be able to communicate with players, recognise what you do that might impact on some of the players around you. So the collaborative nature of bringing the units together, for me, is a really important thing when we start thinking about some of those end game skills and attributes that we're trying to develop.
Yeah, and again, they got opportunities to show that work, whether they use a timeline or whether they clip. And obviously, some players are better at doing things than others, but they get an opportunity to. The fundamental thing is they get an opportunity to look at the games themselves, look a little bit deeper at it, and then bring back their findings to the coach or the coaches. The coaches then get together, and then on a Tuesday, they have a whole team meeting. So they bring together all the stuff that's been brought up, but also what the coaches' opinions were based on their viewing of the game. So then they can really start to have a more in-depth conversation about what they thought happened, but also how are they going to use this information for the next games and for the future development of the players. And then on a Thursday or Friday, the individuals then get an opportunity to talk about their own individual clips or their own individual things that they're wrestling with, what they want to get better with, and they lead that, so they can identify the stuff that they would like to work on, but it'll also be linked back into their evolving individual development plan. So the player is at the heart of it, and because they know it's about them, and because they can see the benefit of what they're doing and how much they're involved in their development, they buy into it. And what it also does, it gives them an opportunity not just to talk to each other, which is build a better relationship and a more secure environment where this just becomes a norm. So now all of a sudden the analysis that's going on is just a normal part of the week. It isn't anything, the players aren't anxious on a Sunday about what they're going to deliver on a Monday. It's just normal. They come in and they deliver it together, and the defenders and the goalkeepers go together, the midfielders go together, the forwards go together. And then once they've done all of that, they still talk because they're still players. They still share the same changing room.
And I guess in your experience of seeing this process evolve over time, what have you sort of recognised in terms of, I guess, the players' engagement and enthusiasm, but I guess the benefit that maybe that's given to coaches from them having the insight from the players?
Yeah, definitely. I think first and foremost, it would be the performances that the players are starting to produce, because they're now starting to identify and recognise stuff in game, because they've had lots of more opportunities to see it just through playing the game, but through analysis or watching. They're now starting to recognise patterns and trends in the game, and therefore, rather than just waiting for these things to happen, they're almost preempting what's happening, and they'll be able to look at the cues and triggers and then try to identify strategies to stop those things from happening. And the key to this is they're not always successful, but what it means is they can then go back and review again and start to think, well, this was the information I looked at, and I referred to this part of the information, but maybe I need to hone in a little more on something, or maybe I need to look at something completely different. So what they're starting to do is, when they're performing, they're starting to evaluate in game as opposed to just post game. Because again, this is a really important factor. We just don't want the players to become really good off the pitch at evaluating it. It's how they connect it and how they learn and how they apply it back when they're on the pitch.
Absolutely, brilliant. No, great example. Great example. Andy or Bev, anything you want to add in there?
Yeah, I was. I think in terms of the benefits you spoke about there, I think it's a massive benefit. I know we're talking about the players, but ultimately it does affect the players. It's a massive benefit to the coaches as well in terms of, I guess, just the feedback that you're getting. the feedback you're getting from the players by giving them that ownership of going and finding stuff, going and discovering for themselves. Yeah, giving them the opportunity to do that. So you're now, as a coach, like I say, it's a real good opportunity to understand, well, what do the players understand, and where are they at their stage of development as such, or actually it's a real good learning opportunity as well, where you're as a coach, you're starting to hear more about what's actually happened on the pitch and what people were thinking as well. So yes, I think that and ultimately, like I say, part of that feedback loop are the players that you're working with as a coach developing as you would like them to, based on the environment that you're creating for them.
Brilliant. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the overview really of the process which is used. So the players are obviously at the heart of it, and everyone sort of feeds into them, and it's a two-way process where they feed back out as well. So Andy's point is really valid. But the players engage in it; they actively want to do it because they see the benefits of it, and they know that it helps them to learn and develop. The on-field coaches get loads and loads of constant feedback, so they can then start to factor in this feedback and tailor the way that they actually plan for training, or apply techniques in training, or view the game, or support during the game. So they're getting loads and loads of stuff, which is from the players and because generally the feedback you get from the players is what you see them doing in terms of their performance. But what you're trying to get now is what they're starting to get now is they're getting more of a why the players are performing the way they're performing, the things that they're considering in the decisions they're making in their performance. So it's that, and I think going back to what Andy said right at the beginning, it's all done in a really, really positive environment, because it is all around communication, and it is all around collaboration, but ultimately it's around everyone having the same goal of trying to help the players get better. What it also does is it builds a stronger connection with the off-field coaches, because the players know that they can go to different people and get a different lens, or get different information, or get similar information, in a different way, and then start to think about how they might use that. Because if the players aren't aware of how they might use this information, they've got someone to go and ask. The players might even start to ask, well, rather than having, and depending on which club you've got, obviously, and the facilities they've got, but rather than having a pitch on the halfway line, can we have one behind the goal? Can we really start, so we can really start to look at how our performance looks from back to front, or from front to back, rather than just that sort of panoramic view. So there's loads of stuff which is going on with this sort of thing, but also you can speak to those coaches, the off-field coaches, about pre and post tasks, or pre or post things that you want to view, or to measure, or to look at. So I think what it does is it sort of brings everyone together, and it brings everyone together for the same common purpose in developing the players, with the players being at the heart of that, but also being the ones that can instigate that whole process individually or collectively.
I think for me, something that really, really stands out, and something sometimes I think, is easy to forget, is that it's around maximizing your resources. So often, like Andy and I know, we often stand up and deliver a workshop together on one of our courses, and we start talking around some of the barriers people maybe see with analysis, and we try and break down some of those barriers. And one thing that comes up time and time again, no pun intended, is time. In terms of, as a coach, I don't have the time to review the game and click this and do that. And I think this process has demonstrated, as a coach, you don't have to be at the heart of the process. Maximize your resources. Your players are your resources. It's about them. They can review the game. They can clip and tag and bring things forward that they want to discuss about. As coaches, we do not have to own that process. And actually the benefits of the players doing that themselves are huge in terms of their development of analytical skills, of understanding their game, understanding the game, having conversations with their players and teammates around them. For me, it's almost like a complete no-brainer why you wouldn't have the players more involved in some of these processes.
Yeah, and I think that starts really early with them. And just the last thing I'll say, the precursor to what they do within the youth team is they get players in the YD phase on a sort of fortnightly basis, just getting used to watching themselves and starting to, but also feeding back around some of the stuff they see. So again, it becomes a natural process, because once they've gone through the PDP, they're going to get a lot of this once they get in the first team.
And that's it. And I think I guess trying to allude to on one of the slide previously, and we'll probably use it to summarise at the end, is in terms of through the phases of development, what does analysis look like? Because in my opinion, it should be quite different. So first team down to sort of your 18s PDP, you're going to have probably some quite big similarities there between the two, because in the PDP phase, you're trying to prepare players to go into that first team environment. But at YDP, rather than thinking about preparing players for first team, can we help the players develop some of the skills they're going to need at the PDP phase? And similarly, if we're in environments where we're able to work with analysis and have players engage in that process in a foundation phase, again, not thinking about what it needs to look like the first team, but actually what can we do to help the players be better equipped and to start developing some of those analytical skills. And that might just be watching the game, not necessarily themselves. It's going to help them when they move into that YDP phase. I'm tripping over things, YDP phase. And, what's going to help them in that phase when they're going to probably maybe start taking a bit more ownership in terms of studying themselves. And I guess thinking that, Bev mentioned it at the outset in terms of scaffolding that learning and coaches being educators and learners and starting to think, not everything has to look like the first team environment. How can we help players develop those skills along that pathway? Bev, do you want to bring us some international examples?
Yeah, I think, international level, you're in for an intense period of time, like 10-day camps, or if we use last summer, the World Cup, it's 52 days. So I think how you deliver it when you're in an intense environment or an environment that goes for a long period of time, it's all about variation. So this is just an example. It was a series that we played, two-game series. And what we did is we sent the girls clips prior to camp. They then had access to them on camp. And what we did was we broke off into groups that we carefully put those groups together. And they really broke down about how to beat these opponents using our own principles of play. And I think, us as coaches, we were there to facilitate and guide them to make sure that how we played was in line with our principles. But what you learn in these experiences is you can sit in front of a group of girls, 30 girls in a room, and you can talk at them, and the level of engagement's not there, obviously. I think, you put them in these tasks, you see what's on those flip charts there, they have knowledge. You've got players with 140 caps in the room who are breaking it down, who are, they're used to using video clips and they see things a certain way. And as a coach, you get a check understanding. You get to gauge where they're at versus maybe where we're at and where we might need to shift them. So they did that, they presented back. And what I should say here is on camps, generally what we'll do is we'll start with you early, normally more coach-led. And as we get to in, we'll break that up into more units, self-driven learning, so that by the time they cross that white line, they own the game plan, they understand their role. But you also got to get their buy-in in that. And I just think this was a really good variation of how we might approach a game plan. And if I use another example, in the World Cup, you're in it was for the Norway game, so it would have been, day 40 of being on the road. We also had like individual pictures of the opposition, and obviously a lot of our players have played internationally against a lot of different teams, and they're up there and they're putting strengths and weaknesses of individuals. And you look at the board at the end of the meeting, and it's just absolutely full with detailed information that these players have, because they've watched them, they've played against them, they play with teammates who may play in their team, so they know strengths and weaknesses. So I just think sometimes as coaches, you've got to be okay to let go of the reins and see what these players have in their locker to contribute to the group.
No, I think, I summarised it with what Matthew was talking about, that, the knowledge and the resource that's often in the room from the players. I think, Ben, if you're working with a squad of 18, 20 players that, many of which all have, hundreds of caps, years of experience, in international football, but then years of experience in football, and you start adding that together, you've got 500-600 years plus of experience in front of you. And by being more collaborative in the way we work and engaging players in the process, we all mutually get to benefit from that experience. And having, more of an understanding of how they see the game, where their knowledge is. It was massive for me a number of years ago, working with some of our international squads, and a bit similar to the method you described there, Bev, in terms of, I can remember we had maybe a 3-4 day build into one of our first games, and we've done some work with players in terms of them studying the opponent. They've done some great work on the training field. And the evening before, we just brought the players in small groups to tell us what they thought the game plan was. And the level of detail and insight that they were able to articulate and share with each other, I was, massively surprised by, and it opened my eyes certainly then to the real benefits of working in a more collaborative way and maximising the knowledge and resource of the players that we've got.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you learn as time goes on is actually the facilitation of tasks like this is really important, because I think if it's just a free-for-all, I think our job is to try and simplify at the end of it. So they'll have they'll dump lots of ideas and then try and simplify that now to say, we work on, 3 biggest things, or, some concepts because you've got variation. You've got 140 caps and you've got a player who's come from the PDP phase and, they're nervous and they're going into a big game, etc. So I think trying to simplify and pull all their ideas together into something that's much more clear and understandable by the end of it, but they've gone through all the complexity before you've simplified it, basically.
No, I think that's a really good point as well, in terms of I know I've been guilty of it in some of the environments I work in, that with the content and some of the technology we've got, I think framing it up and the task or the lens through which we're setting the challenge or the question, that's so important, that it's not just a go and have a look at this, and it's you're almost going into it with a really wide lens and not knowing, but having that clear focus as a coach. Okay, as a result of doing this exercise or task with the players, I want them to be able to get to this point and this level of understanding. I think as a coach, having that clarity, it's really important to therefore work back from that to set the right task frame or lens through which to watch that content through.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should move on to the next one, the set plays. I think this is a brilliant example in terms of players really being at the heart of the process.
Yeah, I think similar to I was talking about before, you've not only got game plans, you've got how we play, but then you've got the added, set plays are a huge part of the game. I think a third of goals are scored from them, so it's really important. But at sometimes I've seen it in environments where it's just like an afterthought, or it's the meeting that everyone's like, oh, I'm bored out my brains. But I think what we've done is be really clever in terms of understanding, learning their engagement. So what we've done is we have a set play leadership group, players that are in charge of certain elements of set play. So I'll use an example of, if you're a deliverer, you deliver the ball into an area in an attacking sense, you'll lead a group of players who profiled as a deliverer to go away and have a look at how the opposition set up and start to, come up with some ideas about how we might hurt them in that group, and then present back to another group that might be on first contactors. So those who have to be the ones who have to put the ball in the back of the net, as an example. So working in groups, looking at the opposition and then coming together to share. And then, on the day of a game, this picture would be in the World Cup day of a game, doing innovative things like, you don't want to go to a pitch 45 minutes away when you're in France, putting down a pitch in the hotel, players now getting up and moving these water bottles to problem solve on, well, if they do this, how do we respond to that? And people getting up and being engaged in the process. So there's just, I guess, different ways. And we as coaches, you have to have different tools that you use at different times. So if we had a high engagement meeting that morning and we had an afternoon, it might look different. So I think it's just the art of variation to keep the players engaged, particularly when you're on the road for a long time.
I think that's a very good point, and something I certainly experienced sort of working in the international environment across big tournaments. But I also think it has sort of key messages when you look at some of our, club league programs and the volume of games. You look at a championship or a League One where you're playing 48 league games a season. You're playing every 3-4 days, which is exactly what your World Cup experience would be like. And how we work with players, having that variety to keep the level of engagement there is really important, and mixing it up. So it's not like, you're not doing the set play meeting in the same way every single time, the 4 or 46 games that you're going to play. And yeah, having that variation to keep the players stimulated and to make them think and challenge them in different ways is vitally important. So coming on to the next one, and I guess this links back nicely to that, you know, that development pathway. What have you recognised in terms of maybe players that are coming into the senior women's squad that have maybe had, you know, some more recent experience in our youth team pathway compared to players that have maybe been in that senior women's environment for a number of years in terms of their engagement with analysis?
Yeah, I think, you know, the difference is very clear, and we'll talk a little bit at the end, but I think the modern, it doesn't even have to be a player, the modern child coming through, the amount of access and how good they are on a computer, video, etc. For me, there's a stark difference, even just in the squad, because you've got 30-odd-year-olds and then you've got these sort of 18, 19-year-olds breaking through. And I think what the pathway has done a really good job of is that sort of self-responsibility. So this is an example of a player who's, you know, we've gone to Shebeli, played in the tournament, you know, wanted to review her clips with myself and Phil. You know, she coded her own clips, she wrote notes, we interacted remotely through Huddle as a platform. And I think that was just like, that's eventually you want to get to a team that's just leaderful, that, you know, I think by doing this, you have a growth mindset, you get used to watching yourself, what's good, what's bad. Our job is to, you know, some players will look for all the bad and our job is to find the good. So I think the interaction with the coach is really important in this setting. But I think the future player coming through is, you know, this is the way forward. I mean, lockdown is, Huddle is an example. That's when you're not face-to-face, you're remote. Internationally, it works really well because you just get that interaction. So I think that the young player coming through is equipped with a whole load of tools to help them improve, basically.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you make an important point there in terms of recognising the individual. And I think as coaches, that's a really important point to make, to recognise that actually we are all different and our players in our squads will see things differently. So again, I reflect and use myself as an example. I'm very much glass half empty and negative. So I would review stuff and be highly self-critical. Whereas compared to another player, you know, it might be the complete end of the spectrum. So as a coach, again, I come back to the point I made, the lens through which we give the players to watch content, you know, it's got to be specific to the individual needs. So me, for example, being quite self-critical, I'd almost need a coach to help me put a positive spin on things. So Laura, I want you to come back and tell me the 2-3 things you did really good in this game or in this particular phase. And straight away, my lens to watch that game is completely different to not having that framework or context to look through. And the importance of recognising individual difference and variability is huge, particularly because, like you say, the technology we've got available to us means that we can do a lot of work, individually. We don't have to be together. So that framework, that task, that lens is really important. I guess, Andy, you look like you want to step in. Obviously, with Coach Logic being an online platform, you must see lots of examples of that in different ways that you maybe engage players through those platforms.
Yeah, there is actually a question for Bev, if that's okay. It was just, and actually Matthew as well. It's sorry to hijack here, host here, Laura. It was going back to looking at the different phases that players are going through. And then Bev, you were talking about how, I don't know if better prepared is the right phrase, but the players are coming through the pathway are better prepared. I guess how much movement as such is there between the pathways, whether it's at a club or international level, in terms of maybe sort of players in the sort of senior teams actually sort of being part of the development of the younger teams as well. So, and whether they, again, going back to that sort of point, sorry, the remote platforms is actually being able, someone in the senior team being able to contribute down to someone who's coming through the pathway.
Yes, so you mean how does our senior players mentor and guide? Yeah, I think we've done that really well in terms of if a player is stepping into our environment, our leadership group will connect with them beforehand. They'll know a little bit about the players, they'll know what they bring. So I think that sort of that partnership that we try and develop before camp then hopefully comes to fruition on camp. And then even, you look at like building confidence and like vicarious learning, watching someone else's clips and, promoting young players to do that as well, where they, either watch one of our players or just watch, could be men's game, could be women's game, and saying, what do you like about what you see there? You mentioned before, Andy, around younger age groups. I think that's really important. It might not be looking at themselves. It might actually be looking at other people and what they do and what can they take from them to help them move forward in their own individual development plan.
Now, I've got a couple of examples from visiting different clubs and seeing what they do, where, across maybe like the youth squads, they'd have all the strikers come together. So the under 12s, the under 14s, the 16s, and the 18s is a group of forwards talking around some of the challenges they face, or you might have some of the, the older players helping some of the younger players in terms of what the evolvement of that position might look like through the phases, and what different challenges the game presents them as they progress. And similarly with the defenders, there's great value in I guess just thinking a little bit differently to how we work with our players, and again maximizing the resource that we've got, like the power of an under 18 having a conversation with an under 14 or under 12 for both of those players. And again, we think back to some of the benefits and some of those skills that we want players to try and develop to help them be successful. That, leadership skills, for example, communication skills, are all vital parts of the footballer's toolbox. And there's different ways away from the field that we can help players, practice, learn, and develop some of those skills.
Yeah, definitely.
Andy, I think it leads us quite nicely on to probably to some of these next couple of case studies, really. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, I'll just go through quickly and give an idea of what happened. So it's this, I guess, looking at that be more coach idea, and just as we were talking about there, the under 18 having a conversation with the under 14, they're kind of in a coach's role there, which is pretty powerful to be able to accelerate learning. So this was just a task that was done 100% remotely, obviously under current conditions, where players at school were given the task to review an international rugby player's performance across a couple of games. Actually, it was. So you can see there it was sort of under 16s, under 17s, and they were obviously given a bit of a framework around where to look rather than what to look for, and relate it back to their own IDPs as well. So as individual players, they'd done some work leading into this round about what their IDPs would look like. So relating it to that as well. And then actually, the player, Ben Earl, as I say, plays for England, he then came on a Zoom call, and the players actually had the opportunity to, share the clips that they'd found and ask him some questions and get some feedback. And I just think that one of the things that we heard as well was really powerful was it only took the players, sort of 16, 17-year-old players, 3 or 4 minutes to identify the IDPs of an international player, and a player who's got ambitions to be the best in his position in the world. So, going back to what we were just speaking about a second before, it's, for me, that it doesn't need to be say here you're going to go and be coaches, but that very much is the type of task that a coach might traditionally undertake. So, actually having that opportunity to look at some footage that they're not involved in, pick out some good stuff, some things that they might need to work on, but then also still having that opportunity. It's meaningful because they're relating it back to their own skill set or their own desire around their IDPs to improve. So yeah, I just thought it was a really nice example, and it was very, very player led. I think Matt, who's from the school, who's the director of rugby there, he actually admits I didn't give them a lot of input as to what to look for. He says in hindsight, I thought maybe I should have, but it didn't matter because it worked out really well because the players were able to pick up on stuff so easily. So I thought that was, let's say, that kind of just that sort of idea of being more coach and watching stuff, and it's a real positive experience. And I think that can definitely be helped if you're watching footage initially to help with engagement, that you're not potentially involved in yourself, and it's not to hide away from watching yourself, but it just maybe helps you to look with a slightly different lens.
No, I think it's a great example, and it links back to some of the things we're discussing at the outset in terms of, how you might start introducing analysis with players, and whatever their age, we've got players that are 16, 17 here. they're not watching themselves, but they are being analytical and developing some of those skills that are going to ultimately help them when they need to come and start looking at themselves. And it's a great example at any level for coaches to take away and apply as a really nice introductory, an introductory example of analysis. And obviously in this example, fantastic, you've got an international player to study. But again, linking back the conversation we've just had, that might be someone in your own first team or a player a couple of the age groups up. And you're just helping players develop those sort of analytical skills, and helping as a coach finding out about their understanding of the game and their knowledge, which is only going to ultimately help you as a coach.
Yeah, that's cool. I think, like you say, it doesn't need to be international. Just anyone there's some sort of connection with, I think is pretty powerful. So,
great example. Great example.
Are we going to?
Just go on to the next one.
Yeah. So yes, this was one again. It's kind of interesting actually. So, just got me thinking. Is that last example? It was very much the players were very involved in the analysis process at the school from the outset within this. Whereas actually, so this is one of the schools that's a hockey example. I think a similar age group. But they actually went from the other extreme, where the director of hockey there admits that he had this, I think he was using Gamebreaker, had this very sort of complex coding window that he would go and sit on his laptop and spend hours on a Sunday night before school on Monday coding the game. And then he would get them into a classroom situation and go through the game, but effectively telling the players what he's learned, because they hadn't that was the first time they got to see the game with all his thoughts. So over time, and they are using course logic, but over time what he now does is what they look for is at a much higher level, and they're reducing the amount of areas that they're coding, because what they're seeing now is that rather than looking for every potential, especially at that level, it's saying, well, let's just, if I can get them to do the work and share out the load in terms of actually doing the coding. So they actually, what they would do in terms of that process is they would give each player maybe 10 minutes each just to look at the whole game, and to look at, I think they've maybe got 8 events within the game that they would look at. And then once that's been done within that 10-minute period, they'll then come back together and the coach will go through certain areas of the game based on what they're trying to work with, or players will go through areas of the game. And then they'll just pick out a few clips that will then be shared on a team basis, on a unit basis, but also on an individual basis. And it's always coming from both sides. It's always coming from the coach and the player, so anyone can have that opportunity to start. So they've gone from a very, very sort of coach-led situation to a very player-led situation, which culminated in them being in the indoor finals. It would have been at the end of last year. And actually, the nature of the tournament is you play a couple of games throughout the day, but you have big breaks. So when they learned or worked out who they were going to be playing in the final, the players then decided on the game plan for that final, and went in and actually performed really well. And just a hugely positive outcome there. And that would never have been possible if they'd stuck to that method of it being very, very coach-led. And again, understanding is that actually the plan that they came up with was really strong. I think they did come up with, yeah.
I guess in that example as well, that the process you described of the coach taking the laptop away and doing the hours of work in this environment where you've got a couple of games a day and turning stuff around, you wouldn't have had that information available. I think it's interesting just looking at some of the pictures. The players are all looking, it looks to me like they're all on their phones studying bits of content, and I think that will link quite nicely to how sort of we summarise this session in a few minutes in terms of the current generation, what they're familiar with in terms of different tools and technology, their engagement with video. It's, like I say, it's just a complete no-brainer that you're sharing the workload. You're giving the players ownership of studying the game, learning from the game, helping themselves, as opposed to it being like a coach-driven process or an individual's responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. I think phones and notepads, I think it is, which is a nice little
nice blend. You've got the golden in you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that what was just as we move on to the last one, I think it was like definitely for them less, because they wanted to get the players it was important to get the players' input. They actually realised that in terms of the starting point for what they were looking for in the game, less is more.
Yeah.
You know, so rather than saying go and look for this or go and look at this, it's, well, here's a framework, and there's a lot of freedom within that for you to go and find some things and ask questions, start a conversation. And then the last one is,
this is brilliant. Sorry,
this is the sort of, well, social network, as I say there. So this was again tournament based, so it's under 18s playing rugby again, playing a tournament, over I think about 10 days. They play a few games in that period, and then the day after England and Wales played, they met up to basically go over what their notes were, their preview notes were. So players, players in the same position would sit down with their opposite number and effectively say, these are the things that we thought were a strength of yours, and here's the things that we'd identified as a weakness that we thought we could potentially exploit. And then they did that on a unit basis, and they also did it on a sort of a team basis as well. And just, yeah, like the links there for people to go and watch. It's, you know, it's a short video on Twitter, but just like so powerful that, you know, having that opportunity to extend outside your own network and actually get, rather than think, well, what do other people think about us, go and actually ask them and find out. So, and that was an amazing learning experience for all those players and coaches that would have been involved in that process. So yeah, I think, you know, practicalities, obviously it was a tournament, but equally, you know, there's lots of pre-season tournaments will happen, or you'll play local fixtures maybe a bit more in pre-season if you're involved in a national competition. So I think it's not something you do every week, but it might be a pretty powerful opportunity to do, you know, once or twice a year. And even if you don't have the footage in advance, you know, I don't think there's anything to stop doing it as a review process as well, in terms of, well, what did you think was good about us? Where did you think you could gain some advantage over us? I think could be done even without that sort of preview task as well.
It's for me like that. The opportunities to learn in that environment are absolutely phenomenal. So seeing, you know, what other, you know, so, you know, if I'm a player and I've got ambitions to be the best that I can be, to see how other players are perceiving you and what, you know, where I did identifying as your weakness just feeds into sort of what your development plan might be, what things, you know, you'd want to go and work on, and I guess the motivation from hearing that from a direct opponent, a direct peer, is just so powerful. It might, you know, having not done it, that would be my perception. I don't know, Bev, do you only have similar conversations? You must get it in the international environment, because you'll have players that are teammates for England that are, you know, opponents in the club game, and how they learn from each other to shape and develop their own games.
Yeah, and I think even I'm thinking about sometimes, you know, if you were an opponent and you watch this clip, where would you hurt us? You know, just sometimes it's reversing it, and you know, I've done it where I've, in my own environment, about, you know, a scout, and this is what a scout has said about us. So I think just flipping it that way as well, just for their own learning, because I think sometimes when they're watching themselves, or they're only looking at what we do and how we play, versus zooming out a little bit and saying, oh, okay, well, actually I could hurt us like this, and just posing some different questions sometimes.
No, brilliant. I think, again, that leads us just, I guess, quite nicely to our last little bit to sort of wrap everything up and conclude. I think we've made reference, I think, throughout to the slide that we put up in the outset, and I guess it's something to you know, having listened to some of the case study examples that we've shown today, and to start, I guess, just thinking about some of these things in your own individual environments, in terms of, so, you know, what does it look like at the top end of the game in terms of some of those skills and attributes, not only in analysis but generally to be the best, you know, that you could possibly be. And ultimately, I guess we want to help players have professional careers in the game, and then I guess start working back from that output in terms of, you know, what does that mean, and what does analysis need to look like in our PDP phases, in our YDP phase, and if we've got the facilities in our foundation phase. And I say if we've got the facilities, I don't actually think you need them, because there's so much availability of content. We can start getting players to be analytical by studying footage on YouTube. It doesn't have to be a recording of themselves. It doesn't have to be a recording of your players in the YDP phase. There's a wealth of content out there that players can learn and engage from, seamlessly through, you know, Andy's shared some of these stats that Coach Logic have generated through some different bits of research and analysing different bits of research. And I just find these absolutely phenomenal in terms of the players that are coming through our development pathways today and are the, the players of the future in terms of how much they engage with content in videos. I mean, the one of the one that stood out for me in terms of it's just the volume. 23 hours per week of video content they're streaming and watching on average of 48 videos a day. And, Andy made a great point when we were talking about this earlier in terms of it, that probably demonstrates the length of time they're engaged. So I guess as coaches, what can we learn from that in terms of maybe some of the content we want players to learn and engage with? Matt, I know you mentioned one earlier that stood out for you in that. Do you want to just share that with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple, but the one that stood out for me was, the YouTube clips. About 8% of people have learned something from YouTube, and I think it's a great go-to now, isn't it? Certainly, my daughter has learned loads of. She's a skateboard fanatic, and she's learned loads and loads of stuff from YouTube because I can't use a skateboard. I can't show her, and yes, she's had trial and error, but it's brilliant that she can go and learn that. And I think from our point of view now, certainly as an adult, my go-to, if I don't have any instructions or I'm unsure about something, my go-to is YouTube because I can see someone doing it. I can watch a tutorial. There's so many different variations of it being done. I can see failures of it being done. I can see really, really quick ways of it being done. And it just gives you that instant hit. And like I said, those videos are no more than, they range from 30 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. It's a small portion of your day, which you can stop, you can review, you can reflect, you can go back if you made a mistake. It's a great opportunity, again, to use some sort of analysis out there to help people perform.
No, it's a great point, and I'm not embarrassed to share that I definitely wasn't born in the mid-90s, somewhat before, and I recently had to fix a puncture on my little boy's bike, and I was having an absolute nightmare with it, if I'm honest. And the first, when I started to struggle, what did I do? I went onto YouTube and just Googled fixing a puncture. Soon learned that I had to actually take the wheel off the bike in order to do it, which was a massive help. But like you say, it was a 2-3 minute video tutorial. I watched a bit, paused it, did what the video showed me, played the next bit, did the next bit, and lo and behold, hallelujah, I fixed a puncture on a bike. I felt very proud of myself. But it just demonstrates the I guess the way we learn is massively evolving, and I guess there's loads of things as coaches we can learn from that to help our players. I don't know, Bev, is there anything that jumps out from you that on there that you can link back to sort of your world and your coaching world?
Well, I think just the attention span, when you look at how much someone takes in a day now, to maybe like being able to just sit in silence, or to, I think the attention span part is really important. And I think how you deliver a meeting or how you engage with a player, it needs to capture their attention, and it needs to be shorter snippets. You could probably, if you go back 10, 15 years, there's no doubt you could probably sit in a room, deliver a meeting that went on 45 minutes and not blink, because I think it was just what people did. But I think now the innovation of how you engage, how you use technology, everything is really important for just attention span alone.
Brilliant. Andy, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, excuse me, the ones always jump out.
Just to add to that, I think.
Go on, Matthew.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, following on from Bev's comment there, is that, and the slide, the kids and the people now are so used to using analysis and these sorts of platforms that it would be remiss of us not to use it, and to use it to the best of our knowledge and the best to impact the players.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
but Andy,
yeah, I just think the ones that always jump out at me are the ones in the two extremes of the 80% say YouTube has helped them become more knowledgeable, and I just think in this context, and YouTube is definitely helpful in this context as well, but actually if you just replace that YouTube with video and actually just giving access to video that can be learned from, and potentially setting a task and having a bit of a framework around that is really powerful. And then on the other side of that, with the 7 and 10 said watching videos with others helps them feel more connected, is that, again, technology makes this possible, and it's been demonstrated unbelievably well during lockdown, is give them collaborative tasks with video. It doesn't have to be, here, you go off and do this on your own, you go and do that, and then we'll all come back together. It's actually, there is that opportunity to collaborate, and it's not in here, but just, we were speaking briefly obviously about it before, and that just growing up with, like, kids just grow up with video as part of their lives. You know, I've got a 3 and 5 year old, and they're getting videoed all the time. I know they're out with my wife at the moment, and they'll probably get videos taken of them messing around in the woods, and they love watching themselves, you know. So, and they love watching their mates or their cousins or whatever it is, and, you know, being part of that. And but they also they like to control it as well. So they like to watch. They like to hold the phone when they're watching it. They don't want you to put the phone in front of them and say, "Here, watch this." They like to hold the phone. They want to go and then look for others and all that. So I think, going way back to the start about that access to video content, that, you know, willingness to engage or desire to engage, are just a natural thing that they want to be in control of themselves being on a video. I don't know. I think is there a case of, you know, getting out of the way of players rather than, which maybe sums up a little bit some of the stuff talking about, getting out of the way of them in terms of, here, go find something and we can look at after, rather than thinking that, you know, we have to maybe create these mad schemes to get people to watch video, which it would appear is not a problem. So
I think it's an absolutely great point to finish on, and you know, loads of great discussion and input. It's challenging my thinking. It's making me think about loads, and I'm sure the people that tune in and watch are going to be able to take away loads from what we've discussed probably over the last hour or so now. So I apologise if it's gone on a little bit longer than anticipated. Thanks to Andy, Bev, Matthew for your contributions as always. Yeah, look forward to having a chat about this in more depth soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.